Chief Richard Harrison's mahogany coffin. His desperate barks echoed off the walls, drowning out the minister's prayers in the muffled sobs of the bereaved. "Someone get that damn dog out of here." His deputy chief Parker, his face flushed with anger. Show some respect, Detective Michael Carson watched as two officers attempted to drag Max away, but the dog broke free, plunging toward the coffin with such force that the floral arrangements toppled. The MERS gasped. Sarah Harrison, the chief's widow, covered her mouth with trembling hands. Max's behavior wasn't just grief. Carson had seen the dog at countless death scenes. This was different. The animal wasn't mourning. He was alerting. When Max suddenly launched himself at the coffin, tearing at the silk lining with his teeth, chaos erupted as hands reached to restrain him. Carson stepped forward, a cold realization washing over him. "Wait," he commanded, raising his hand. "Open it. Open the coffin now." In the stunned silence that followed, only Max's persistent growls could be heard. What happened next would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Detective Michael Carson had spent 23 years with the Riverside Police Department, 15 of them under Richard Harrison's leadership. At 46, Carson's weathered face told the story of a man who'd seen too much. The creases around his eyes deepened by both laughter and grief, his salt and pepper hair cropped military short, his blue eyes retaining a sharpness that missed nothing. 3 years ago, Carson had lost his wife Emma to ovarian cancer, leaving him alone in a house too big and too quiet. What most of Riverside didn't know was that Carson's connection to Chief Harrison went back much further than his police career. As a troubled 16-year-old caught breaking into the corner market, Carson had encountered Officer Harrison, who saw something worth saving in the angry young man. Instead of processing him through the system, Harrison had taken him home for dinner, introduced him to Sarah, and over meatloaf and mashed potatoes offered him a deal, or Unity service and weekly check-ins instead of juvenile detention. That night changed Carson's life trajectory forever. "You've got good instincts," son Harrison had told him years later when Carson made detective trust them, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. Chief Richard Harrison had been a fixture in Riverside for over 30 years. At 58, he still cut an imposing figure, 6'2" with broad shoulders, in a military posture that commanded respect without a word. His steel gray hair and trimmed beard framed a face known for fairness and integrity. The wrinkles around his eyes spoke of someone who smiled easily but could turn deadly serious in an instant. Harrison and his wife Sarah had no children of their own, though they'd informally adopted countless troubled youth. Over the decades, their childlessness wasn't by choice. Sarah had suffered 3 miscarriages early in their marriage. Instead, they poured their nurturing instincts into their community, and into Max, the German shepherd who'd been Harrison's partner before retiring to become their family pet. Max had come into Harrison's life 7 years ago, during a warehouse raid that went wrong. The drug bust had triggered an explosion that killed Max's handler and left the dog badly injured. Harrison had stayed with Max throughout his recovery, and the bond formed couldn't be broken. When Max was deemed unfit to return to active K-9 duty due to hearing damage in one ear, Harrison had brought him home permanently. Sarah Harrison was her husband's equal in compassion, but possessed a quiet strength. All her own at 56, her auburn hair now stray with silver. She'd taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. For 28 years, her students past and present filled 3 rows at the funeral, clutching handmade cards and tissues. Deputy Chief William Parker had been Harrison's second in command for 8 years. At 49, his ambition was an open secret. In the department trim meticulous with carefully maintained blonde hair and a politician's smile, Parker had always been respected but never loved, like Harrison Dr. Elizabeth Miller. The county medical examiner stood apart from the MERS, her analytical gaze moving between the coffin and Max. At 38, she was relatively new to Riverside, but had quickly earned a reputation for her. Thoroughness? Something about the chief's death report had bothered her from the beginning. Riverside itself was changing once a peaceful manufacturing town of 75,000. It had been hit hard by factory closures. In recent years, a growing opioid crisis had transformed certain neighborhoods, bringing violence and desperation. Chief Harrison had been leading a major investigation into a trafficking ring that reached surprisingly high into Riverside's power structure. So the rumors went now, as Max's barking echoed through the funeral home, the threads of loyalty, suspicion, and secrets began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. The call came at 6:42 p.m. Carson was hunched over case files in his cramped office when his phone vibrated against the coffee ring. Des Officer Jenny Ramirez's voice cracked as she delivered the news that would shatter his world detective. Carson. "It's about Chief Harrison." Her voice faltered. "He's gone heart attack, they think at home." Sarah found him on the couch when she got back from grocery shopping. The words hit Carson like physical blows. His hand gripped the phone so tightly as knuckles whitened. Chief Harrison dead, the man was a force of nature. Ran 5 miles every morning, had just laughed with Carson yesterday about retirement being at least a decade away. "That's impossible," Carson said reflexively. I just saw him this morning. He was fine." "I'm sorry, sir. The paramedics confirmed it. An hour ago, they've already taken him to Riverside Funeral Home." Miss Sarah requested immediate arrangements. Carson's mind raced through their last conversation. They'd met for coffee at 7:00 a.m. to discuss the East Side drug trafficking case. A sprawling investigation that Chief had been personally overseeing. Harrison had seemed preoccupied, asking Carson to meet him again tomorrow with strict instructions. "Tell no one we're meeting, not even Parker. He mentioned anything unusual to you lately." "Anyone threatening him?" Carson asked, already reaching for his jacket. "No, sir, but Deputy Chief Parker is handling everything. Now he said to inform all senior officers, but to proceed with arrangements quickly for Sarah's sake." The rush to bury Harrison struck Carson as odd, unsettlingly, so standard procedure for any officer's death, let alone the chief's, would include a thorough examination. Who pronounced him? Was Miller called in? "I don't think so." The paramedic said it was clear-cut natural causes. By the time Carson arrived at Riverside Funeral Home, the parking lot was already half filled with patrol cars. The stately Victorian building, with its somber facade and manicured gardens, had hosted the funerals of 3 officers during Carson's career. Never had he imagined the chief would be the 4th inside. The central viewing room had been quickly prepared. Harrison's body lay in an open casket, dressed in his formal blues metals, gleaming under soft lighting. Sarah sat nearby, surrounded by fellow officers. Wives, her face ashing with shock when she saw Carson. Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, perhaps, or recognition of shared grief. "Michael," she said softly as he knelt beside her chair, "thank you for coming so quickly." "Sarah, I'm so sorry." The inadequacy of the words burned his throat. "What happened? He was fine this morning." A shadow crossed her face. "They said his heart just stopped, but Richard was healthy as a horse. You know that his physical last month was perfect." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He's been working late, Michael. Very late. Wouldn't tell me why, but he was worried about something." I could tell Carson. Nodded, filing away the information. "Where's Max at home?" "Parker suggested leaving him there, but I couldn't bear it. My neighbor's bringing him over soon." As if summoned by discussion, the funeral home door swung open, and a petite woman entered, struggling with Max's leash. The German shepherd's disciplined demeanor vanished the moment he entered the viewing room. He froze, ears alert, then began pulling frantically toward the casket, whining in distress. "I'm so sorry," the neighbor apologized as Max dragged her forward. "He's never like this." Carson moved to take the leash. "I've got him. I am." The moment Carson took control, Max's behavior intensified. The dog stared at the coffin, his whines turning to sharp, insistent barks that echoed through the hushed room. Several Murs stepped back in alarm. "Detective, please control that animal." Deputy Chief Parker appeared at Carson's elbow, his voice tight with irritation. "This is highly inappropriate." William Parker had always been meticulous in appearance and demeanor. Today, his uniform was impeccable, his composure controlled, perhaps too controlled for a man who just lost his superior and mentor of 8 years. Max was Harrison's dog, Bill. He deserves to be here. The dog is clearly distressed and disrupting the service. Take him outside. Carson made no move to leave. Instead, he watched Max intently, the detective in him noting every detail of the animals. Behavior Max wasn't just upset. He was alerting the same way he'd been trained to signal when finding evidence or detecting danger. "Something's wrong," Carson murmured more to himself than to Parker. "The only thing wrong is you're allowing that animal to disrupt the chief's dignified send-off." Parker hissed, "Sarah doesn't need this additional stress across the room." Dr. Elizabeth Miller slipped in quietly, nodding briefly to Carson. Her presence was unexpected, and by the look on Parker's face, unwelcome, was Miller called to examine the body. Carson asked Parker there was no need. The paramedics confirmed cardiac arrest for a police chief. There should be an autopsy. Parker's jaw tightened. Sarah declined. She didn't want Richard subjected to that indignity before Carson could respond. Max's barking reached a new intensity. The dog lunged toward the coffin, nearly pulling Carson off his feet. Several officers moved to help restrain him. "Get him out of here now, or I'll have him removed." Parker ordered. Carson reluctantly dragged Max toward the exit, the dog fighting him every step in the lobby. He encountered Dr. Miller. "That's interesting behavior," she commented. "Watching Max struggle, you think so too?" Miller glanced over her shoulder, then spoke quietly. "I wasn't officially called in, but I have questions about the chief's death, sudden cardiac arrest." In a man with his medical history, no prior symptoms, Carson's instincts, already on high alert, sharpened further. "Can you get access to examine him, not without authorization, which Parker seems determined to prevent?" She hesitated. "The funeral schedule for tomorrow morning. Very rushed, don't you think?" As they spoke, Max continued to bark toward the viewing room, straining at his leash with growing desperation. Carson made a decision. "I'm staying overnight. Funeral home staff will be here, but I want someone from the force present. I don't think Parker will authorize that." "I'm not asking for authorization." Carson's voice hardened. "Something isn't right, and I trust Max's instincts almost as much as I trusted Harrison's." As night fell on Riverside, Carson settled into an uncomfortable chair in the funeral homes, and room Max lying alert at his feet. Both man and dog kept their vigil, neither knowing that by morning everything would change in ways impossible to imagine. The funeral home grew eerily quiet. As midnight approached, the staff had retired to their quarters in the adjacent building, leaving Carson alone with Max in the dimly lit viewing room outside. Rain began to fall, droplets tapping against the high windows. Like impatient fingers, Carson had positioned his chair with a clear view of Chief Harrison's casket, which now stood closed per funeral home protocol. Max had finally settled, though his rest was fitful. Every few minutes the German shepherd would raise his head ears, pivoting toward the casket, a low whine building in his throat before subsiding. Carson absent-mindedly stroked the dog's head, his own thoughts churning with memories and questions. "What were you working on, Chief?" he murmured. The East Side drug trafficking case had consumed Harrison's attention for months, but lately something had changed. The chief had become more guarded, keeping unusual hours, meeting contacts alone. Behavior out of character for a man who believed in transparency, in teamwork, at precisely 12:17 a.m. Max suddenly leapt to his feet, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. Carson was instantly alert hand, moving instinctively to his Hall-Ed weapon. The dog's focus was locked on the far corner of the room, where shadows gathered, thick and impenetrable. "Who's there?" Carson called. Rising slowly, silence answered him, broken only by the intensifying rain. Max continued growling, taking a protective stance between Carson and the darkness police officer. "Identify yourself now." A slight movement, Carson's eye, a shadow detaching from deeper. Shadows, a figure emerged, male medium height, wearing a dark overcoat and hat pulled low. "My apologies, detective. I didn't mean to startle you." The voice was cultured with the slightest accent Carson could in place. I'm an old friend of Richard's, came to pay my respects privately. Visiting hours ended at 9, Carson replied evenly, noting how Max's hackles remained raised, and I don't recall the door opening. The young lady at reception was kind enough to let me in through the side entrance. The man took a step forward, then hesitated as Max's growl deepened. I see Richard's dog remembers me not fondly. It seems Carson didn't lower his guard. Your name, the James Marshall. Richard and I served together years ago, the man gestured vaguely. I was passing through town and heard the terrible news. Carson studied the visitor carefully. Nothing about him suggested immediate threat. Yet every instinct warned Carson that something was off. The man carried himself with military precision, but his eyes darted repeatedly to the casket in a way that spoke of anxiety rather than grief, I don't recall. Chief Harrison mentioning a James Marshall. We lost touch. My work takes me overseas. Frequently, Marshall reached into his coat pocket, causing Max to bark sharply. Hands where I can see them. Carson ordered. Marshall slowly withdrew his hand, showing a business card. Just my contact information, detective. Perhaps we could speak tomorrow about Richard's legacy. Before Carson could respond, a sound interrupted them, a faint but distinct thump that seemed to emanate from the casket itself. Max immediately whirled, racing to the coffin and pawing frantic at its side, barking with renewed urgency. Marshall's face drained of color without another word. He turned and moved swiftly toward the side exit, disappearing into the rain-soaked night before Carson could stop him. Carson hurried to the casket, his heart pounding. Surely he'd imagined the sound, grief, and exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. Yet Max's behavior had escalated to frenzied desperation, the dog now attempting to climb onto the casket platform for him. "Easy, boy," Carson murmured, though his own hands shook slightly as he laid them on the polished wood. Easy. Now the night passed with agonizing slowness. Carson attempted to contact Dr. Miller, but his calls went unanswered. He considered calling Sarah, but couldn't bear to disturb her with what might be nothing more than his overwrought imagination. Instead, he documented the strange visitor in his notebook and maintained his vigil. Max, never leaving the casket, sighed DA by dawn. The funeral home stirred to life again. Staff arrived to prepare for the 10 a.m. service, eyeing Carson and Max with a mixture of sympathy and concern. Sarah arrived at 8, accompanied by her sister and Parker, whose face tightened upon seeing Carson. "You stayed all night?" Sarah asked, touching Carson's arm. Gently, I wanted to make sure everything was properly respected. Carson replied, not mentioning the midnight visitor or the strange sound. "Max was unsettled. That dog needs to be taken home," Parker interjected. "We can't have a repeat of yesterday's disruption." Sarah shook her head firmly. "Max stays. Richard would want him here," as they spoke. Funeral home staff began the final preparations. Floral arrangements were positioned. The guest books set up, programs distributed. Carson noticed Parker checking his watch repeatedly, speaking in hushed tones with the funeral director about keeping things moving efficiently. More mourners began to arrive, officers in dress uniforms, city officials in somber suits, community members whose lives Harrison had touched. Each paid their respects to Sarah before taking seats in the rapidly filling room. Dr. Miller slipped in, catching Carson's eye with a significant look before sitting near the back. At 9:45, the funeral director approached Coach Sarah, Mrs. Harrison. "If you're ready, we'll begin the procession to the cemetery. After the brief service, the pallbearers should take their positions." Now 6 officers, including Carson, moved to surround the casket. Max, who had remained remarkably calm until now, suddenly began barking again. Not the alert barks of last night, but panicked, desperate sounds that echoed through the crowded room. Someone controlled that animal. An elderly city councilman demanded. Parker stepped forward. "I warned you. Carson, get him out now." But Max had broken free, launching himself directly at the casket. His powerful jaws clamped onto the silk lining, draping over one side, tearing it away with violence. Force women screamed. Men jumped to their feet. Sarah stood, frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Stop him!" Parker shouted, reaching for his ceremonial sidearm. "Wait." Carson moved to protect Max, dropping to his knees beside the frantic dog. "Listen to me. All of you, something's wrong. The only thing wrong is your inability to control that beast. Parker snapped. No, Carson stood facing the shocked crowd. Max is trying to tell us something. Chief Harrison trained him himself. This dog doesn't behave this way without reason. Michael? What are you saying? Sarah whispered. Carson took a deep breath, knowing his next words would either destroy his career or possibly save a life. I'm saying we need to open this casket now. Now, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Parker stepped between Carson and the casket. This is outrageous. You're desecrating Harrison's memory based on a dog's behavior. Richard always said Max could sense things. We couldn't, Sarah said quietly, her voice gaining strength. If Michael thinks something's wrong, I want the casket opened. Sarah, you're emotional. This isn't appropriate. Parker insisted. I am his wife. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Open it may. In the tense silence that followed, Carson noticed Dr. Miller moving closer. Medical bag in hand, the funeral director looked between the opposing parties, is clearly distressed by this unprecedented situation. Mrs. Harrison, are you absolutely certain? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Do it! Do it! As the funeral director reluctantly moved to unlock the casket lid. Max fell silent at last, watching intently with dark, knowing eyes. The entire room held its breath. No one prepared for what they were about to discover. The funeral director's hands trembled as he unlocked the caskets, brass latches. The heavy lid creaked open, revealing Chief Richard Harrison's still form, dressed in his formal police uniform, hands folded across his chest. For a moment, the room remained in stunned silence, mourners uncertain what they had expected to see. Dr. Miller pushed forward, medical instincts overriding protocol. She pressed 2 fingers against Harrison's neck, her expression professionally neutral after 10 seconds that felt like eternity. Her eyes widened. There's a pulse, she announced, voice cutting through the silence faint. But it's there. The room erupted in chaos. Sarah collapsed against her sister, half sobbing, half laughing. In hysterical relief, officers crowded forward, their training overcome by shock. Max barked triumphantly, tail-whipping back and forth of everyone. Back, Dr. Miller commanded. Give him air. Someone call an ambulance now. Carson was already on his phone reporting the impossible situation in clipped, urgent tones as he spoke. His eyes never left Parker, whose face had drained of all color. The deputy chief stood rigid-mouthed, working silently, looking not like a man. Overjoyed at a miracle, but like someone witnessing his worst nightmare materialized. Let me see him, Sarah pleaded, pushing through the crowd to kneel beside the casket. Richard, can you hear me? No response came from the chief, though Miller confirmed his breathing shallow and irregular, but present. As she continued her examination, she suddenly frowned, her fingers discovering something at Harrison's collar. Detective Carson, she called sharply. Look at this. Carson leaned in, partially hidden by the uniform collar, was a tiny puncture mark surrounded by a faint bruise, nothing that would be noticed during casual preparation of the body, but unmistakable to trained eyes. That's not from normal embalming, Miller murmured, for only Carson to hear. And there's another mark here on his inner arm. Carson's mind raced injection sites. Someone had administered something to Harrison, something that Mimi Death, closely enough to fool paramedics working under pressure. The realization hit him with physical force. This wasn't a medical mistake. This was attempted murder. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the commotion. Emergency medical technicians burst in with a gurney equipment bags slung over shoulders. Dr. Dat to my doctor. Miller briefed them rapidly as they transferred Harrison from casket to gurney, attaching monitors that confirmed the miracle. A heartbeat, faint but persistent, BPS dangerously low, pupils sluggish but reactive. The lead paramedic reported, "We need to move him now," as they wheeled Harrison out, Sarah clutching his limp hand. Carson turned to find Parker had disappeared. The revelation wasn't surprising, but it confirmed his darkest suspicions. Scanning the crowd, he spotted Officer Ramirez-Jenny. "I need a crime scene team here immediately. This funeral home is now an active investigation site. No one leaves until they've been questioned." "Sir?" She looked bewildered. What crime attempted murder of Chief Harrison? The words rippled through the remaining guests and get an ABB out on Deputy Chief Parker and consider him a person of interest. Carson followed the ambulance to Riverside Hospital Max in the back seat of his cruiser. His mind worked maniacally through the implications of what had just happened if Harrison had been poisoned rather than suffering natural cardiac arrest. The speed with which the funeral had been arranged made terrible sense. Someone wanted the chief buried before anyone could look too closely. The midnight visitor, James Marshall, clearly had been checking to ensure Harrison remained in his chemically induced death-like state. The sound Carson had heard might have been the first sign of Harrison's body fighting the effects of whatever he'd been given at the hospital. Harrison was rushed to intensive care. Carson paced the waiting room, making calls to secure the scene at the funeral home in A. Maintaining his vigilant position beside the bed, a soft knock at the door brought Carson's hand to his weapon. Dr. Miller entered, looking exhausted. "I've completed preliminary toxicology on the needle fragment," she said, without preamble. "It's a compound called tetrodotoxin, modified to slow metabolic signs to near-death levels without actually killing the victim." Very sophisticated, very rare military or high-level criminal organizations. This isn't street-level stuff. She handed him a file. "I also reviewed the paramedics' initial report. They followed protocol, but this poison is designed to fool standard death confirmation methods. The person who did this knew exactly what they were doing." Carson nodded grimly. Someone wanted him to wake up inside that coffin underground, a particularly cruel death. Miller agreed. "We're nearly foolproof. No autopsy, no questions. Just a respected chief who died of natural causes." A sudden commotion outside the door interrupted them. One of the office guards entered. "Sir, we found Deputy Chief Parker's phone. It was in his desk at the station. The tech team has recovered deleted messages between Parker and someone named Kingfisher. They referenced the chief in something called Operation Clean Sweep Kingfisher." The code name struck a chord in Carson's memory during a briefing on the East Side drug case. Harrison had mentioned a high-level distributor known only as Kingfisher, someone whose identity remained elusive. Despite months of investigation, "Have them send me everything they found," Carson instructed, "and check Harrison's computer for any files related to Operation Clean Sweep," as the officer left a soft groan emanated from the bed. Carson turned to see Harrison's eyelids fluttering. Max was instantly alert, ears forward, tail wagging cautiously. Chief Carson moved to the bedside. "Can you hear me?" "Me?" Harrison's eyes opened, halfway unfocused and confused. His lips moved, forming words without sound. Carson leaned closer. "Pile." The word was barely audible, a breath more than speech. "Jacket pocket. Your uniform jacket?" Carson asked, heart arsing the one you were buried, in a slight nod. Then Harrison's eyes closed again, the effort of communication exhausting his limited strength. Dr. Miller rushed forward to check his vitals. "That's actually a good sign," she said. "Brief consciousness suggests the brain damage may be minimal, but he needs rest." Now, Carson was already on the phone instructing the forensics team to check every inch of Harrison's dress uniform within an hour. They called back. "We found it, sir, sewn into the lining of the left jacket pocket. A micro SD card. Bring it here immediately and keep it absolutely quiet." While waiting, Carson reviewed the recovered messages from Parker's phone. They painted a disturbing picture. Parker had been feeding information to Kingfisher for months, warning of raids, sharing confidential informant identities. In return, substantial sums had been deposited in an offshore account. But the most recent messages contained something more chilling. "Harrison knows he has proof. Problem must be eliminated before Thursday meeting with FBI." The FBI meeting was news to Carson. Had the chief been working with federal authorities without informing his own department if he suspected corruption within Riverside PD, it would make perfect sense when the SD card arrived. Carson viewed its contents on a secure laptop. What he found left him cold, detailed evidence linking the East Side drug operation not just to Parker, but to Judge Michael Collins, but who had mysteriously dismissed cases against key suspects. More damning still were records showing Mayor Robert Hastings had accepted campaign contributions from shell companies linked to the cartel. Harrison had documented everything meticulously. Financial records, surveillance photos, transcripts of conversations. He'd been building an airtight case, planning to present it all to the FBI. His thoroughness had nearly cost him his life. A text from Officer Ramirez broke Carson's concentration security breach at Hospital Unknown Subject. Attempted to access ICU through service entrance security. Pursuing Carson's blood ran cold. He slammed the laptop shut and drew his weapon, positioning himself between the door and Harrison's bed. Max growled low, sensing the tension lock. This room down, he ordered the guard outside. No one enters. Not doctors, not nurses. Without my explicit approval, the assassination attempt had failed. Once Carson knew with grim certainty that King Pfizer wouldn't leave the job unfinished. With Parker gone and Harrison still alive, the entire operation was at risk. Desperate people made desperate moves, and whoever was behind this had already proven their willingness to kill, as if confirming his fears. The hospital light suddenly flickered, then went out completely, leaving only the emergency backup lighting casting eerie shadows across Harrison's vulnerable form. The hospital's emergency generators hummed to life, casting the ICU in a dim amber glow. Medical equipment beeped erratically before stabilizing on backup power. Carson pressed himself against the wall beside the door gun, drawn, ever since heightened in the semi-darkness. Max took a protective stance at the foot of Harrison's bed. Hackles raised a low, continuous growl rumbling from his throat. "This is Detective Carson," he spoke into his radio. "We have a security situation in the ICU. Chief Harrison may be the target. I need all available units to the hospital." Immediately, static answered him. The radio system was down, likely not a coincidence. Through the door's small window, Carson could see the hallway filling with confused medical staff and patients, perfect cover for someone trying to reach Harrison's room. Undetected Officer Menz, he called to the guard outside. "Don't let anyone approach, regardless of their credentials." "Yes, sir," came the steady reply. Though Carson noted the slight tremor in the young officer's voice, minute stretched like hours. Carson's phone vibrated. "Raymer's security cameras down 3 officers, en route to your location. Suspect described as male medical scrubs, surgical mask." Barson's eyes narrowed. The description could match dozens of legitimate hospital personnel currently scrambling to manage the power outage. He texted back, coordinate with hospital security. "I want all access points to this floor locked down." A scuffle in the hallway drew his attention through the window. He glimpsed Officer Mendez confronting someone in blue scrubs. The figure seemed to be arguing, gesturing urgently toward Harrison's room. Carson couldn't make out the words, but the body language suggested increasing agitation. Suddenly, the figure lunged at Mendez. There was a flash of metal, a muffled cry. The officer staggered backward, clutching his side, as the asshole shoved past him toward the door. Carson braced himself, max guard. He commanded sharply. The dog instantly positioned himself between the bed and the door, teeth bared. Every muscle tensed for action. The door burst open. The attacker froze momentarily at the sight of Carson's leveled weapon in that split second. Carson recognized him not from his partially masked face, but from his distinctive stance and build. "Parker," Carson said coldly, "should have known you wouldn't run far." The deputy chief's eyes darted between Carson Max and Harrison's unconscious form. Blood stained the surgical gloves on his right hand. "Mendez's blood, you don't understand what you're involved in." Carson Parker's voice was tight controlled. "Despite the circumstances, this goes beyond Harrison. Beyond Riverside, drop the scalpel on your knees." Now Parker's laugh held no humor. "You think I'm here alone. This entire hospital is compromised. You've already lost." As if to confirm his words, the sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere in the building. Screams followed. The distraction was minimal, but enough. Parker lunged forward, scalpel aimed at Carson's throat. Carson fired. The bullet caught Parker in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The deputy chief crashed into medical equipment, but remained upright, face contorted with pain and rage. Before Carson could reposition, Parker was on him, driving both men to the floor. The scalpel slashed downward. Carson caught Parker's wrist, the blade hovering inches from his eye. They struggled, locked in a desperate contest of strength. Parker had the advantage of position, using his weight to force the blade closer to Carson's face. "You should have stayed out of it," Parker hissed. "Harrison was supposed to die peacefully now. You'll both suffer a blur of tan," and black fur launched across the room. Max attacked with precision, powerful jaws clamping onto Parker's forearm. The deputy chief screamed, the scalpel clattering to the floor. Carson drove his knee upward, throwing Parker off balance, then delivered a sharp blow to his temple. Parker slumped, momentarily stunned. Carson scrambled to his feet, retrieving his weapon. Max Hold, the German Shepherd, maintained his grip on Parker's arm. Intelligent eyes fixed on Carson for further commands. "Police," Carson ordered, training his gun on Parker's chest. Max reluctantly let go, remaining poised to attack again, if necessary. Parker sat up slowly, cradling his bleeding arm. "You've got no idea what's coming for you, Carson," he spat. "King Fisher doesn't forgive failure. Who is King Fisher? Give me a name." Parker's eyes moved past Carson to the doorway. His expression shifted from defeat to something like triumph. Carson sensed the new presence too late. Pain exploded at the base of his skull, a brutal impact that sent him crashing to his knees. Vision blurring, his gun slipped from numbed fingers, and through the haze, he saw a second figure in the room, tall, well-dressed, holding a heavy metal oxygen tank, like a club finish it. The newcomer ordered Parker, who was already retrieving the scalpel from the floor. Max launched himself at the second attempt attacker, but the man anticipated the move. He swung the oxygen tank with terrible precision. There was a sickening thud, a high-pitched yelp of pain, and Max collapsed in a heap. No Carson lunged toward the fallen dog, but Parker's boot slammed into his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. "I told you," Parker sneered, twirling the scalpel. "You've already lost." Carson struggled to focus, fighting W of NOS and pain. The second man approached Harrison's bed, producing a syringe from his jacket pocket. "Make it look natural," he instructed Parker. "Cardiac arrest from complications." Nothing suspicious despite his swimming vision. Carson recognized the voice, refined slightly. Accented the midnight visitor from the funeral home. "James Marshall." The man paused, turning toward Carson with mild surprise. "Very good detective, though. That's not my real name, of course." Carson fought to remain conscious, to find some way, any way to protect Harrison. "You're Kingfisher." A thin smile among other names. He uncapped the syringe, moving with unhurried precision. "Nothing personal, you understand. Just business." Parker kept his boot firmly planted on Carson's chest, the scalpel now pressed against his throat. "What about him?" "Similar complications," King Pfizer replied coldly, but a tragic night for Riverside Memorial Hospital. As the needle approached Harrison's IV line, a strange sound filled the room, a wet, gurgling cough. Max was struggling to his feet, blood matting his fur, but determination undiminished. The dog staggered, then gathered himself for one final desperate lunge at King Fisher. The distraction was minimal, but enough. Carson drove his elbow upward into Parker's knee with all his remaining strength. The deputy chief howled momentarily, thrown off balance. Carson rode, grabbing for his fallen weapon. The hospital room exploded with sound and motion. The door burst open as officers poured in. Ramirez led the charged weapon, drawn police freeze. King Fisher reacted with startling speed, driving the syringe not into Harrison's fourth, but into Parker's neck as he used the deputy chief as a human shield. Parker's eyes widened in shock and betrayal. "You promised!" He gasped as King Pfizer shoved him toward the advancing officers. Chaos erupted. Parker collapsed, convulsing violently. Officers shouted, contradicting commands. King Pfizer backed toward the room's window, producing a small handgun from beneath his jacket. But Carson, still dazed, but functioning on pure adrenaline, saw what was about to happen. Gun. He shouted, diving toward Max to shield the wounded animal. Two shots rang out in rapid succession. King Fisher staggered, blood blooming across his expensive shirt. Ramirez had fired, first her aim true, but King Pfizer had managed to discharge his weapon as well. Carson felt a searing heat tear through his left shoulder, spinning him back to the floor. The room swam in and out of focus. Carson was vaguely aware of officers securing King Fisher, of medical staff rushing in, of voices calling his name. Max whimpered nearby, dragging himself closer to Carson. Despite his injuries, the dog saved the dog. Carson managed before darkness claimed him. Carson awoke to steady beeping and the antiseptic smell of hospital disinfectant. His body felt leaden, his mind foggy from painkiller. Slowly memories filtered back. The power outage. Parker attacked Kingfisher. Max, he tried to say, but his throat was too dry for more than a rasp. He's going to be okay. Sarah Harrison sat beside his bed, looking exhausted, but composed. She offered him water, helping him drink through a straw. Max has a fractured rib and a concussion, but the veterinarian says he'll make a full recovery. They're keeping him at the animal hospital across town. Relief washed over Carson and the chief. Sarah's expression softened. Stable. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. He regained consciousness briefly. Yesterday asked for you and Max yesterday. Carson had lost time. How long have I been out? Almost 36 hours. The bullet went clean through your shoulder, but you lost a lot of blood. Parker, Sarah's face hardened. Dead whatever was in that syringe. Work quickly. And Kingfisher in surgery. He'll live to stand trial. Her hand tightened around the water cup. It was Judge Collins. Michael, the Judge Collins who's been on the bench for 20 years, the one who married Richard and me. Carson closed his eyes briefly. The betrayal would cut Harrison deeply when he learned of it. I know his name was in the files, along with Mayor Hastings. They've arrested Robert this morning. The FBI had been building their own case. Apparently, Richard had been working with them for months. She shook her head in disbelief. A judge and the mayor, both on a cartel's payroll. It doesn't seem possible. Money corrupts, Carson said simply. And Collins and Hastings had expensive TIES. A soft knock interrupted them. Officer Ramirez entered, looking as tired as Carson felt. Sir, glad to see you awake. She handed Sarah a paper cup of coffee before continuing. Thought you'd want an update. The FBI has taken over the case. They've made 17 arrests so far, including 3 more officers from our department and the county commissioner. Carson nodded, unsurprised by the extent of the corruption. Harrison had uncovered something far larger than anyone had suspected. A criminal network that had infiltrated every level of Riverside's power structure. Collins is talking. Ramirez continued, trying to cut a deal. He claims Parker was the primary contact with the cartel, bringing him and Hastings in later, when they needed judicial and political cover, and the attempt on Harrison's life. Parker's idea, apparently the chief was getting too close, had too much evidence. Collins provided the poison through his cartel connections. She hesitated. Sir, there's something else. They found a detailed burial plot. In Collins' home office with your name on it. You were next. The revelation sent a chill through Carson, despite the room's warmth. He'd suspected as much, but confirmation brought the danger into sharp focus. There's more, Ramirez said, her voice dropping. The toxicology report on Chief Harrison showed something unexpected. The poison was administered in small doses over weeks, most likely in his coffee. They found residue in the break-room coffee machine at the station. It was targeted specifically at him, who had access to the break room. Everyone in the department, but the machine was replaced 3 months ago. Only 4 people knew the specific brand Harrison preferred. You, Parker, the chief's assistant, and Sarah Carson finished the pieces falling into place. Sarah Harrison's face drained of color. No, that's impossible. I would never— Not you, Carson interrupted gently. Your sister, she's been staying with you, hasn't she? Since before Richard got sick. Sarah stared at him, uncomprehending. Linda. But why would she? Ramirez nodded grimly. We found payments to her account. She's been dating Collins for the past year, kept it quiet because of his position and connection to your family. The coffee cup slipped from Sarah's fingers, spilling across the sterile hospital floor. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with horror and betrayal. She brought coffee to Richard every morning. She whispered, said it was our special way of showing we cared while he was under so much stress. Carson reached for her hand, his own pain forgotten in the face of her anguish. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the hospital corridor. Voice over the intercom called urgently for medical personnel to report to the ICU. Harrison Carson realized, struggling to sit up despite the searing pain in his shoulder. It's the Chief. Ramirez, already moving, hand on her weapon. "Stay here. I'll check," but Sarah was on her feet. Already rushing toward the door, Richard T., Carson forced himself upright, ignoring the pull of stitches and the wave of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. Harrison was still in danger, would remain in danger as long as anyone connected to Kingfisher's operation remained free. And if Linda had been working with Collins and Parker all along, the realization hit him with sickening clarity. She would have access to Harrison's hospital room, as family would know about the security measures, the guard rotations. Ramirez, he called, staggering toward the door. Find Linda Harrison. Now the ICU corridor had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Medical personnel rushed in and out of Harrison's room, their faces tense with urgency. Monitors wailed in electronic distress as a crash cart was wheeled through the doorway. Carson staggered forward, each step sending waves of pain through his injured shoulder, his hospital gown flapping, undignified around his knees. Sarah stood, frozen in the hallway, one hand pressed against the observation window. Her face a portrait of renewed anguish. Inside the room, doctors performed CPR on Harrison's still form, his body jerking lifelessly with each compression. "What happened?" Carson demanded of the nurse, attempting to block his approach. His heart stopped suddenly. No warning signs, all vitals were stable, and then she broke off, turning at the sound of the defibrillator charging inside the room. Clear, a doctor called. Harrison's body arched as electricity coursed through it. The monitor continued its flat, merciless tone. Carson scanned the crowded hallway, searching for Linda Harrison among the hospital staff and security personnel. No sign of her. Had she already fled, or was she watching from somewhere, ensuring her handiwork was complete? This time, Linda was here. Sarah whispered, her voice hollow with disbelief. 10 minutes ago, she brought coffee for the officers on duty, said she was giving me a break, that I should get some air. Ramirez appeared at the end of the corridor, shaking her head grimly. No sign of her on this floor. Security is checking the exits inside Harrison's room. They were trying again. Clear, another jolt. The monitor beeped once, twice, then settled into a fragile rhythm. "We've got him back," someone called. Sarah sagged against Carson, her relief palpable, but the respite was brief. A doctor emerged, pulling his mask down, his expression grave. "Mrs. Harrison, your husband is stabilized for now, but his condition is extremely critical. The toxicology team believes he's received another dose of the same compound we're administering the counteragent." But what? Sarah pressed, clutching Carson's arm for support. The first poisoning caused significant organ damage. This second exposure, his system may simply be too compromised to fight anymore. Her words fell like stones. Carson felt Sarah trembling beside him, her composure finally beginning to crack under the relentless assault of betrayals and near losses. "But there must be something more you can do." Carson insisted. The doctor hesitated. "There's an experimental treatment protocol. It's aggressive with significant risks, but it might help neutralize the toxin more effectively." "Do it," Sarah said immediately. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to be clear. This could save his life, or the strain could kill him outright. And even if he survives, the combined neurological damage from both poisonings might be substantial." Meaning, Carson asked, though he already knew the answer. He might never fully recover consciousness, or he might wake up with significant cognitive impairment. There's no way to predict the outcome. Sarah straightened, finding steel within her grief. Richard would rather fight. No matter the odds, he's never given up on anything in his life. Do whatever you can. As the doctor returned to Harrison's room, Ramirez's radio crackled. She listened intently, then turned to Carson. "They spotted Linda in the parking garage. She's in custody. I need to see her." Sarah said, her voice suddenly cold. "That's not advisable," Ramirez began. "She's my sister. She poisoned my husband. I need to know why." Carson understood her need for answers. "However painful they might be, bring her to the security office. We'll meet you there." The small security room felt airless, its fluorescent lighting harsh against Linda Harrison's tear-streaked face. She sat handcuffed to a metal chair, her designer clothes in, congruous with her circumstances. When Sarah entered, Linda's composure crumbled entirely. "Sarah, please, you have to believe me. I didn't know what they were planning. I thought it was just to make him sick enough to retire. You poisoned him?" Sarah's voice was eerily calm, day after day. You came into our home and poisoned my husband." Linda's shoulders slumped. Collins said it was harmless, just something to cause stress symptoms, force Richard to step down before he ruined everything, before he exposed the judge's corruption. "You mean," Carson interjected. Linda shot him a venomous look. "Michael doesn't understand what it's like for people like us. Sarah living on a teacher's salary, a cop's pension. Collins offered me us a way out. Comfort security in exchange for helping a drug cartel operate in our city, for poisoning my husband. It wasn't supposed to go this far." Lindy insisted, desperation edging her voice when Richard didn't retire. Collins said they needed something stronger, just to put him in the hospital for a while. "But then Parker came to me yesterday, said the plan had changed, so you tried to finish the job today," Carson said coldly. Linda's face crumpled. "He threatened. My son said if I didn't give Richard one final dose, they'd go after Tommy. Next, what choice did I have?" Sarah stared at her sister, a stranger wearing a familiar face. "You could have come to me, to the police, to anyone, and say that I'd been poisoned. The chief of police that I was sleeping with the judge who's been protecting drug dealers." Linda's laugh held no humor. I was trapped before Sarah could respond. A sharp knock interrupted them. Dr. Miller entered, her expression somber. "Detective Mrs. Harrison." "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation with Chief Harrison." The dread in Miller's voice sent Carson's pulse racing. "What's happened?" The experimental protocol caused a severe reaction. "His kidneys are failing, and the latest brain scan shows—" She hesitated, glancing at Sarah. "There's evidence of significant damage to the frontal and temporal lobes." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth. "What does that mean if, when he regains consciousness, he may not recognize you? He may not remember his life, his career, his personality could be fundamentally altered." The news settled like a physical weight on Carson's shoulders. Chief Harrison, the man who'd saved him as a teenager, who mentored him. What whose integrity had been the backbone of the department might effectively be gone even if his body survived. "There's something else," Miller continued. "Max was brought in this morning for follow-up treatment. He's exhibiting concerning symptoms as well. The impact trauma was more severe than initially diagnosed, the veterinary neurologist believes. There may be permanent damage. It was too much Harrison's condition, Max's uncertain fate." The conspiracy that had hollowed out Riverside's institutions like a cancer, Carson felt the room tilting his injury and exhaustion, finally overwhelming his determination. Detective Miller's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "You need to sit down before you fall down." He allowed himself to be guided to a chair, vaguely aware of Sarah's quiet weeping. Linda sat stone-faced, the full consequences of her actions finally sinking in. "I need to be with Richard," Sarah said finally. "Of course," Miller nodded, "but there's one more decision that needs to be made, urgently. The hospital has a limited supply of specialized dialysis equipment, with both Richard and Detective Carson requiring treatment." Carson understood immediately. "Give it to the chief." "Michael." "No," Sarah protested. "You were shot. You need treatment too." "I can wait." Carson insisted, though the pain in his side had intensified, suggesting his injury might be more severe than he'd acknowledged. Miller looked unconvinced. "Detective, your blood work shows early signs of kidney compromise from blood loss and medication. Delaying treatment could lead to permanent damage. Harrison needs it more." Carson's tone left no room for argument as Sarah was led back to the ICU. Carson found himself alone with Linda, the silence between them heavy with recrimination. "Was it worth it?" he asked finally. "Whatever Collins promised you, was it worth all this?" Linda stared at her hands. "I never thought it would end this way." "It always ends this way," Carson said tiredly. Every deal with the devil does outside the window dusk had fallen on Riverside. In the fading light, Carson could see police vehicles still surrounding the hospital. Their lights flashing silently, the department was in shambles, its leadership decimated, its reputation destroyed. Harrison had spent decades building something honorable, only to have it corroded from within. The following hours passed in a blur of pain and deteriorating consciousness. Barson refused pain medication, needing to stay alert. Despite his body's protests, reports filtered in 3 more arrests connected to Collins and the cartel evidence secured from Harrison's hidden files. FBI agents taken over the station by midnight. Carson was burning with fever, his wound infected. Despite treatment, each breath brought stabbing pain, each movement of study and endurance. Still, he refused the dialysis. Treatment knowing Harrison's need was greater. "You're being a damn fool," Dr. Miller told him bluntly. During a lucid moment, heroic but foolish. "How's Max?" Carson asked, ignoring her assessment, holding his own better than you. A nurse rushed in her expression. "Urgent. Doctor, we need you in the chief's room. His oxygen levels are dropping critically." Miller hurried out, leaving Carson alone with his pain and the increasingly certain knowledge that despite everything, despite Max's warning, despite opening the coffin, despite arresting Collins and Parker, they might still lose Harrison after all. And in the darkest hours of the night, as his own condition worsened, Carson confronted the possibility that his sacrifice might be for nothing, that sometimes even doing everything right couldn't undo the damage of so much betrayal. Dawn broke over Riverside Hospital pale light, filtering through half-drawn blinds. Carson drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening, bringing fresh waves of pain and the same persistent worry. Harrison no news had come during the night, which Carson interpreted as a grim sign. In his experience, good news traveled quickly. Silence often preceded sorrow. A soft knock roused him from uneasy sleep. Dr. Elizabeth Miller entered accompanied by a tall, silver-haired man in a crisp suit who introduced himself as Special Agent Thomas Reynolds. FBI by Detective Carson Reynolds began without preamble. "Dr. Miller tells me you've been refusing critical treatment that ends now." Carson attempted to sit up, wincing, as his shoulder protested. "Harrison needs it more than I do. Chief Harrison is currently receiving treatment from a specialized medical team that arrived from the city. An hour ago, they brought additional equipment. Federal resources," Miller added. "Agent Reynolds expedited the transfer." The news momentarily stunned Carson. "You brought in specialist for Harrison?" "Why, where was, say, Reynolds studied him thoughtfully, because the chief has been working with us for nearly a year on this case and because loyal officers are worth saving his condition." Miller's expression softened slightly, stabilized. The new team administered an advanced counteragent to the toxin. His kidney function is improving, though the neurological prognosis remains uncertain. Relief flooded through Carson, momentarily dulling his own pain. "And Max, the Canaan officer, is also receiving specialized veterinary care," Reynolds replied. "Apparently he's quite the hero in this case." Carson nodded, grateful but suspicious of the federal agent. "Sudden appear in LARSE. Why are you really here?" He uncovered evidence linking Riverside's cartel to an international criminal network with connections to terrorism financing. Carson absorbed this revelation silently, but it explained the ruthlessness of the attempt on Harrison's life, the high-level involvement of Collins and Hastings. "The operation Harrison infiltrated extends far beyond your city limits," Reynolds continued when he realized how deep the corruption went in Riverside. "He contacted us directly, but for the past 10 months, he's been gathering evidence while maintaining the fiction that he was working a standard drug trafficking case." Parker suspected. Carson realized aloud that's why he moved against Harrison. When he did, precisely, Harrison was scheduled to meet with our task force last Thursday to turn over the final evidence needed for coordinated arrests across 3 states. Barker somehow learned of the meeting and activated a contingency plan. Parsons' mind raced, fitting this new information into the puzzle. But something doesn't add up if Harrison was FBI's inside man. Why didn't you protect him better? Where were you when he was being poisoned? Reynolds had the grace to look discomfited. Harrison insisted on maintaining complete operational secrecy. He believed correctly, as it turned out that the corruption extended into multiple agencies. He refused protection communication devices, even regular check-ins. "So you just left him exposed," Carson said bitterly. "We respected his methodology," Reynolds corrected. "Harrison was a skilled operative who understood the risks. A new thought struck Carson. Does Sarah know about Harrison's work with the FBI? No complete compartmentalization was essential. Harrison protected his wife by keeping her entirely in the dark. The weight of Harrison's isolation settled heavily on Carson. The chief had carried this burden alone, suspecting betrayal from his closest colleagues, unable to confide even in his wife. The loneliness of such a position was staggering. "There's more," Reynolds said, reaching into his jacket. "When we secured Judge Collins' residence, we found this hidden in his personal safe." He handed Carson a small USB drive, identical to the one recovered from Harrison's uniform. A backup, Carson asked. "No, this one contains different information specifically about you." Carson's eyebrows rose in question. It seems Harrison wasn't just gathering evidence against the cartel. He was also building a file to protect you. Protect me from what? Or from false accusations. Collins and Parker had constructed an elaborate frame documenting fictional evidence that would have implicated you in the drug operation bank records, witness statements, even photographic evidence, all fabricated but convincingly. So the revelation hit Carson like a physical blow. They were setting me up to take the fall. If Harrison had died and stayed dead, you would have been arrested within days of his funeral. The evidence was meticulously prepared. Carson closed his eyes, briefly, the full scope of the conspiracy finally coming into focus. Not only had they planned to eliminate Harrison, but they had prepared to neutralize his most loyal detective as well. A clean sweep, as the operation name suggested. "Why are you telling me this now?" Reynolds leaned forward. "Because we need your help despite our arrests. We believe there are still active members of the organization operating in Riverside, people we haven't identified yet before." Carson could respond. The door opened again. A nurse entered, pushing a wheelchair, in which sat an unexpected visitor, Max, his head bandaged, one leg splinted, but unmistakably alert. The German shepherd's ears perked up at the sight of Carson, a soft whine escaping him. He wouldn't settle. The nurse explained he kept trying to get out of his bed. The veterinarian thought a short visit might calm him. Max struggled to rise from the wheelchair, his determination evident despite his injuries. Carson extended his hand, and the dog pressed his nose into the detective's palm with palpable relief. "Hey, buddy," Carson said softly. "You did good, real good." Reynolds watched the reunion with interest. "But that animal's instinct saved 2 lives. Remarkable. 3, Carson corrected. He took down Parker before he could finish me off." As Max settled beside Carson's bed, a new commotion arose in the hallway. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. Reynolds rose, hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon officer. Ramirez burst into the room, breathless with excitement. "Detective, he's awake. Chief Harrison is awake and asking for you." Carson attempted to stand, but his body betrayed him, weakness and pain forcing him back onto the bed. "Take me to him. You can barely sit up." Reynolds objected. "I don't care if you have to carry me. I need to see him." 10 minutes later, Carson found himself wheeled into Harrison's ICU room.